Hello everyone, Dennis Snow here, and I'm excited to be on Dove's show. What I do is I help organizations deliver walk-through-fire customer experiences. What I'll talk about is based on my 20-year career with Walt Disney World and what I learned about delivering an outstanding experience. Now you may be thinking, what does my organization have in common with Disney World? Well, you will be surprised at how much you do have in common. So I'm looking forward to the show.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? I put it to you that today, more than ever, leaders need to get their hands dirty. What I mean by that, we got to roll up our sleeves. We got to find out what's going on the front lines of our business. And maybe one of the places that we are most challenged to do that is in the customer experience level of things. But how can we as leaders do that, particularly in a pandemic and post-pandemic world? Well, stay tuned because that's exactly what you're going to discover on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about me, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives is brought to you in part by the Dragon's Lair Training. You can find out more about the Dragon's Lair Training by going to dovbaron.com. Imagine being in a virtual classroom where I personally walk you through the techniques and strategies that I previously only offered to the top CEOs, C-suite executives, high-level entrepreneurs, athletes, and entertainers. Well, now you have the opportunity to go over to dovbaron.com and hit that menu bar and click on the live training button. When you get there, you'll be able to join us. In fact, you'll even get access to some of the past episodes like ethical persuasion, becoming a meaning-driven leader, resilient leaderships in time of chaos, and a whole lot more. I look forward to seeing you there, so go secure your seat. Also, remember that you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast in there. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And if you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally. Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. In today's competitive business environment, keeping customers happy is one of the foundational keys in long-term success. But we all know that some businesses provide much better service than others. It's not always clear what works and what doesn't work, and implementing new customer services practices into the mainstream can be difficult and chaotic, particularly in these times, again, where things are increasingly remote. Business leaders who want to transform their business culture into one of a customer service excellence need reliable, proven guidance. But while everyone else is scrambling, where do you look for the guidance you need? Well, the answer is right here, because our guest on this episode is Mr. Dennis Snow. He has a passion for service excellence and has consulted with organizations around the world on the subject. Dennis's customer service abilities were born and developed in 20 years of work at, you guessed it, Walt Disney World. In the last year at Disney World, Dennis's leadership performance was ranked in the top 3% of the company's leadership team. That's pretty good at Disney. You got to remember that. He's now a full-time speaker, trainer, and consultant, and is dedicated to helping organizations achieve their goals in the areas of customer service, employee development, and of course, leadership. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the author of 2 books, best-selling books, Lessons from the Mouse,
'em. 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 I'll just assume everybody's applauding right now.
They are.
Yeah, it makes me feel good. Yeah,
In
in my own mind, that makes me feel great.
In the stadium is going insane.
I can always dream.
There you go. It's good to have you here, mate. Thank you.
It is very good. I'm very honored that you invited me on the show, Dove.
My absolute pleasure. Now, where we always like to start the show is by asking this one question. In a world full of influencers and people who are, all that in a bag of chips, oftentimes I have found that the most successful leaders have actually been impacted by a leader, influenced by someone on their leadership that we might not know or we might not suspect. Who is that person for you? Who is the person we might not guess who's had a major influence on you and your leadership style?
The obvious answer, of course, is Walt Disney, from what I grew up with. But it was actually a manager, one of my first managers, a gentleman by the name of Bruce Fox. And when I first got promoted into management at Disney, I was getting ready to give my first verbal reprimand to a cast member, an employee. And I was kind of excited about it, because I was finally giving one, rather than getting one. And so I was getting ready to do it. And Bruce, my manager, came over and he said, "You're getting ready to give a reprimand?" And I said, "Yeah, my first one." He said, let me give you a tip here. He said, "Whatever you have to do as a leader, if you have to reprimand somebody, even if you have to fire somebody, when they walk out of that door, you make sure they walk out with their dignity." And that has stayed. That was 1981 that happened, 1981. Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. I don't know if I've always been successful at it, but I've tried to live up to that. And what that communicates to me is the power that a leader can have without even knowing it. That's stayed with me forever.
I think that, in my work with leaders, that's often a difficult thing to reprimand or let somebody go.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is some leaders will let somebody go and it is brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, how they do it. But I work with leaders and I ask them, well, what happened? And they say that, it never fails. With decent leaders, they'll always say the same thing to me. I just felt so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I felt so horrible about having to do it that the only way I could get through it was to make myself steeled, to steel myself, and then they become horrible, mean.
Yeah.
And what your manager taught you was about dignity, and I wonder what that translated to internally. I know what it translated to externally.
Right.
You never said that, but internally, what did that do for you?
Empathy. It translated to empathy, to understanding. Okay, I still had to do this. All right, I still had to give the reprimand. But just the way I was thinking about it in terms of letting this guy have it and how irresponsible, it was for an attendance issue, how irresponsible. And I had this beautiful thing in my mind, until Bruce said this. And then it really made me stop and think, okay, what about if I was on the receiving end of this? Yes. Now I'm expected to go out and interact with the guests and provide a magical experience and all of those things. So it made me really just take a step back, take a deep breath, still had to get it done, still had to get the job done, but rethink my approach to it. And I think that's the secret is that compassion, that empathy, while still recognizing you have a role as a leader that you have to accomplish.
And that's the interesting thing, isn't it, Dennis? I think that oftentimes leaders don't understand that. I've been speaking about the need for empathy and vulnerability in leadership for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And people thought I was a complete nutter initially. Now it's a cool, trendy thing to do. But back then...
But you think about the best leaders you've had.
Exactly.
They all had, there was some sort of emotional connection. And I'm not saying emotional in the foo-foo way. I'm saying, there was a respect, there was a connection there.
Yeah.
And it's because of the way they did things, the way they approached things. Yeah. Humanity, that's a great word for it.
Yeah, they held the humanity of it.
That's a great word for it.
And that's what I said. When I remember the first time in my position having to talk to a leader about the fact that he had just fired somebody in a very brutal way, and I wanted to shame him.
Yeah.
I wanted to shame him. I wanted to take a large dump on his leadership, and I wanted to shame him for the way he'd done it.
Yeah.
But by asking that question, what was going on for you? Because obviously that was a pretty brutal way to do it. So tell me what was going on for you. And then listening and hearing that he felt so awful that the only way he could get through it, or in his mind, the only way he could get through it was by being an ass.
Yeah.
And by showing him that that actually didn't work for him or the other person. Because I said, how do you feel? He said, still feel terrible. Of course you do. You were an ass. Now let's do it another way. And that transform it. And so again, it's the humanity on both sides.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what people don't realize, is that you actually help yourself by doing that as well as the other person. And what you did with the empathy of like, well, if I was on the other side of that and I had to go out and deal with a customer, probably wouldn't go so well.
Right. I would hate to be the next customer. Yeah. That's right. I'd hate to be the next customer that person faces after a brutal reprimand. Now again, there's a balance there, because you do still have to get the job done, and it has to be non-negotiable. But I think it's just in the approach that you take to it, and that's what I learned from Bruce. And again, the big point for me is it was 1981, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Yeah.
And I think that the people who've had that biggest impact on us, it's timeless.
Yeah,
it's timeless. I can remember those people in my life like it was yesterday. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's take a look back for a moment.
Okay.
Your Disney career started back in '79. You worked at a frontline operator.
On the rides?
On the rides, right.
Yeah.
And then you advanced through the company, and then you went on to doing management, and then you took those and you created this world-class service-driven training part of the organization. Right. Talk to us a little bit about, because that's a big arc.
Yeah.
That's a huge arc.
I wish I could take credit for creating the training operation at Disney, but after many years in operations, I grew up working in operations, working on the rides, then managing operating areas. And what I really found, and I think this happens with a lot of leaders, at some point you find your passion, the thing that just is part of the role that you really love. And what I found, it was education. For me, it was education. So there's a division at Disney World, all the Disney parks, called the Disney University, which is the internal training arm of the company. So an opportunity came up to go to the Disney University and teach new hire orientation and teach management training classes. So I said, I'm going to give that a try and see how much I really do like it. Well, I loved it. And then I got into management of the training arm. Then we spun out of a division, and you probably have heard of the Disney Institute.
Yep.
Which is where companies would come down to benchmark best practices.
Exactly, yeah.
And so we spun off a division that did that, and I managed a part of that operation for the last several years. And that really solidified my passion, not only for the training and education, but just the Disney principles themselves and how applicable they are in a variety of industries. And that's when doing that for a few years led me to go out on my own and kind of take those principles and help other organizations apply them in their world. So I owe a lot to the Disney organization. I owe a lot to Disney World and to Walt Disney, because that's really what has formed the approach that I teach today.
When we get to talking about Disney and we get to talking about Walt Disney, particularly for me, I, as a human being, as somebody who studies human behavior and the psychology of humans, I'm fascinated by the paradox of humans. That a hero can be a villain and a villain can be a hero. One of my great Vedantic teachers taught me, the murderer lives in me. And what that means is there's a dark side in all of us.
All of us. Yeah.
And, when I look at Disney and what he did, here's a guy who was told he couldn't really draw and he didn't really have much imagination, and is, really the pinnacle of manifesting imagination into a reality, as you said, into a world, Disney World, right? So, and there's not one of us on the planet. I mean on the planet, even in third worlds, we all know of something that's Disney, even if it's freaking Mickey Mouse.
Right. Well, most people do know who Walt Disney was.
Yeah. And at the same time, you had some some original quirks,
Sure. Yeah.
politically, and some interesting sides, and
Yeah.
racism was a bit, iffy. And it's interesting to me because I say this to people all the time. You have got to be willing to look at anyone and say, what is the beauty? What is the gift that we're given?
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
And at the same time, it doesn't mean you dismiss.
Right.
Because the reason I bring it up is not because of Disney, in fact, but in fact because of what you said about having to reprimand.
Yeah.
Reprimand doesn't stop. You still have to reprimand.
Right.
But you can do it with dignity. You can do it. And so here's a man that you can praise, and I would praise for what he did. And at the same time, I can completely disagree with his political philosophies. And I think that this is the reason I bring it up is because as leaders today, that is where we all need to go.
Yeah.
We need to, because we're doing this black, white, you're all bad or you're all good. No.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Another leader of mine at one point in my career said, if you're ever looking, if you ever think you're going to find the perfect leader, you are going to lead a very frustrating life. And, and that's true. There's no such thing as a perfect company, and there's no such thing as a perfect leader. When you look back at Walt Disney, he was obviously a product of his time, the time frame. But if you talk to people who worked directly with Walt, they will usually say two things. There's usually two things that will always bubble to the top. He was massively demanding, massively to a fault. He could reduce the most macho animator to tears with withering criticism over something that the animator had created. And on the other side of that, they'll say, and he got us to do things we never thought we would be able to do. And so you kind of put those two things together and you can say, okay, right or wrong, what came out of that was groundbreaking work.
No doubt about it.
And so it's a different world today, though.
Yeah, but in many ways, I mean, of course, Walt Disney is much further back in time, but we can look at Steve Jobs and we have exactly the same conversation.
That's exactly
Steve Jobs was a dick.
Yeah.
As a leader, he was a dick for people to work with. Anybody who ever worked with him said exactly the same. Yeah. He was insanely demanding. He would reduce people to horrible, he would just crap on them from a dizzy height.
Yeah.
But he was immovable at changing the world. Right. And I think that is the great paradox of oftentimes of genius is that Elon Musk sleeps on the floor in his office, and demands people, and I know because I've spoken to people inside the company, are expected to work Saturdays. It's not an option. It's an expectation, and your family is second. And how do you know? Because Elon Musk has been married 87 times, has 400 children, and he sleeps on the couch, and family is second.
Yeah. So Walt was only married once. But
what I'm saying is, my point is that they live their life in a different way.
Yeah.
And if you want to get on that train, I've always said the reason I don't work for people is because I don't like other people's rules.
Yeah.
And if you don't like the rules of Disney, get the hell out. If you don't like the rules of Apple under Jobs, get out.
Yeah.
But these are people who change the world, and I think it's just a very fascinating piece of conversation before we go into anything else.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I worked. Sometimes people ask me if I ever worked with Walt, and I say, "How old do you think I am?" I was 7 years old when Walt died. I must look a lot older than I really am. I said, "No, but I have worked with a lot of people who worked with Walt Disney."
Right.
And most of the easiest way for anybody who worked with Walt Disney to stop an argument is to say, well, as Walt once said to me, then the discussion was over. That was it. You were not going to win that argument.
God has spoken.
Yes, that's right. Somewhere out of the ceiling, God just said yes. And that's not too far from accurate.
I'm sure. But at the same time, aside from all the immense creativity, aside from the immense vision, which is definitely there, this guy understood the customer service experience. And,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and even though he, I don't know that he had a great way of treating his people.
Hmm.
He taught his people to treat the customer
Yeah.
in an insanely brilliant way.
Yeah.
And as you said, as many ways has become the leading, you know, with Disney University and the Disney Institute, a way to show others.
Yeah.
What can leaders do to define? Like, so we're talking about Disney, but what can
Yeah.
leaders of XYZ company,
Yeah.
whether that's a company of 3 or that's a company of 30,000, what can a leader do to define the ideal customer experience? Because
Yeah.
oftentimes leaders are so distant from it.
Right. Well, I've wrestled with this a lot,
I'm sure.
because there, you know, Walt didn't have a formula, but I've kind of figured out how to get other organizations to think in the way that Walt Disney thought when he was creating Disneyland, in terms of the guest experience. You know, they call their customers guests.
Yes.
And that's a big part of it, by the way, is the language that you use.
Yeah.
But here's what I always recommend to organizations that are really kind of getting underway with this customer experience journey, is with your team, key players of the team. And you have to decide who those are, but key players of the team. Come up with 3 things that you would want your customers to say about their experience with your organization. 3 things. Because that makes you really start to think about, what do I want our differentiator to be?
Right.
So for Disney, they would be something like, it was a magical experience. It paid attention to every detail, and they made us feel special, right? I mean, you think about that's what they would want their guests to say. And Walt said, keep it friendly, keep it clean, make it fun. You know, that's really what the words he used. But what are 3 things that you would want your customers to say about their experience? Once you have those, the next part of the discussion falls right into place. It's to say, okay, then what has to happen in order for our customers to say those things about us? So if we wanted our guests at Disney to say they paid attention to every detail, then it becomes pretty obvious as a cast member working, as an employee working there, if I see a piece of trash on the ground, it's my job to go over and pick it up and throw it away. If you see that light bulbs are burned out, that you get the light bulbs replaced. If you see anything that's out of place, that you take care of it. The behaviors fall into place once you've identified what you want the customer experience to be. And that really gets people thinking in terms of, okay, what's going to make us different as a restaurant? What's going to make us different as a contact center, or whatever it may be, as a hospital? What are those 3 things? And it's hard. It's hard to zero in on 3 things, but it's important to do it because it really makes you pinpoint on what you want your competitive differentiator to be.
You know, you said something in there that I think is very interesting. As a person who also follows the history of leadership, when I look at the world before unions, I think I know for sure that unions were really important. I'm not sure that they are doing what they were originally designed for.
You're right.
But that's a different period of time.
Yeah.
But, you know, they allowed for people to actually have a decent life. But there has become what I call a unionized mentality. And the interesting thing that I found about when I've read about the customer experience at Disney is there's no union mentality. And what I mean by that is what you said before. I'm off my shift, I'm leaving the ground, but I notice garbage, I pick it up and I put it in the trash can. If I'm in a union mentality, I go, oh no, it's not my job.
Right.
If I'm working and I want to take a break, I take a break and I go out the back and have a cigarette. Not at Disney. Not when you're in your cast outfit.
Right.
If I see a light bulb burned out, I go I'm a union person. I tell the guy who takes care of the light bulbs, I don't. But I certainly don't do it. How did, in your experience, how did that get across?
Yeah.
Because that's what often is referred to today as a ownership mentality.
Right.
You know, we teach people that in leadership. We say, okay, you know, we've got to create this leadership mentality where everyone feels like they are, you know, part of the company. And sometimes that does mean, okay, well, we're going to give you shares.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. Yeah.
Right. So how is that embedded
Yeah.
in that world?
There's multiple layers to that question.
I'm
The
sure.
first part of it is that while Disney is unionized, keep in mind, Disney is unionized. Mickey Mouse is a Teamster. Okay, and I'm not kidding about that.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, Mickey Mouse. Yeah, the characters are Teamsters. So Disney is unionized.
Right.
And when it comes to union negotiations, they have this. They go through the same gyrations that every organization does. But there's a part of the relationship that recognizes this is what makes the organization successful and will continue to make the organization successful in terms of the guest experience. So certain things are non-negotiable, all right? Picking up the trash off the ground. Now, let's use the light bulb example, okay?
Yeah.
Let's say I'm a cast member and I'm walking through and I see something needs to be painted, okay? I'm a ride operator and I see something needs to be painted, okay? The approach is not, it's my job to paint it, okay? There's a unionized job that does that.
Sure.
And that would be a real problem if I pulled out a bucket of paint and painted it myself, okay? But my job is to make sure that it gets painted.
Right.
To make the call, to take care of it, to make sure that it gets painted. And there's ways of doing that, in terms of phone call and job requests and all of that. But that is my job, to make sure that it gets done. So when you look at how do they embed that, you used the word ownership earlier. That's the key word, is you get people to be so proud of the organization and what they do, that seeing that peeling paint is an offense to their pride, to see that, and that they take the ownership to make sure that it gets done. That's where you want to get to. So during the hiring process, bringing in people who are wired this way, during the onboarding process, talking about that, during the ongoing training and the communication, constantly reinforcing all of that, that you're surrounded by what the experience is supposed to be and what your role in that experience is. So you do take the ownership. It's not a one-time thing where a new hire orientation, you check off a box and say, I will pick up trash off the ground, okay? That doesn't work. It's got to be around you all the time. And what's interesting is that as a longtime cast member, you start mentoring newer cast members. If you see somebody not do those things that they're supposed to do, to call them out on it, and I wouldn't say that the culture perpetuates itself, but to a degree it does.
Sure.
If you build that sense of ownership into every element that impacts the employee or at Disney, the cast member. Well, does that make sense? Does that make sense?
It does. And that's why I want to come to this next piece, which is, because as I said earlier, oftentimes the CEO or even a leadership team are not on the front lines. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to know from you is, for our listeners, our viewers, how do you set up a cultural environment that facilitates that ideal customer experience? Because, you've got your three things down there, and everybody goes, oh yeah, mm-hmm. And then they go to work. Right. Well, and oftentimes, unless we're setting up a spy program,
which they do.
Right. We're not actually watching everybody every single moment to make sure that customer experience thing is going. But it is, and we can rely on complaints, but I don't know if that works. Yeah. So how for the leaders who are not on the front line every single day, we could do the undercover boss thing, but what would you say?
So it begins with that definition of what the guest experience is supposed to be, the customer experience. I mean, that really sets the tone for everything else. Yeah. Now, as leaders, there are three key things that we can do to the word I use is enculturate. It's not a real word, but how to I like it too. It's a good word. It's a good word. But how do you enculturate it? And the first part of it then, as an organization, all levels of leadership, everybody, you keep that vision in front of your people all the time. You have to be relentless in terms of, again, hiring people that are wired this way, that new hire onboarding to immediately start indoctrinating them into that culture that you have, and what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, so they feel it, inside of them. When they go through the various on-the-job training, that culture is embedded. Now, here's how you do that when you load people on rides. Here's how you do that when you hand somebody a hamburger. Here's how you do that when you sell somebody a piece of merchandise. So it's all a seamless thing. And then as leaders, in all of the communications, the team meetings that we have, whether they're virtual and face-to-face, to use stories and examples of what that looks like and sounds like, getting people to share stories. So keeping that vision constantly in front of people. Another key, so that's the first key element of enculturating. Second one is involving your people. We talk so much about employee engagement and how important that is. And people are all over the place on how to do that. There's a simple way to engage your people. How do we get better at what we do? You're the ones out there on the front line all the time. You're the ones dealing with the same issues time after time. What are those issues and what can we do about them? And you're not going to solve every issue, but if you engage the assistance of your people in solving real business problems, they're going to be engaged. They're going to be engaged. And usually the solutions they come up with will be much less expensive than the solutions we'll come up with. And then the third part, which is the part that we tend to leave out quite often, is the accountability piece. Is this stuff non-negotiable? If somebody's not living the values, do you coach? Do you reprimand if you need to? Do you fire if somebody just refuses? And then the other side of the accountability coin is the recognition. Do you demonstrate appreciation and recognition when people really are living the values? So in essence, what you've done is you've taken that culture that you want to have, then you surrounded it with this relentless communication of the vision, involving your people in how you get better at this, and holding people accountable for it. And if you do that, again, over time, it doesn't happen overnight, but over time, people, this is it. This is the way it is. To the point now, when people apply for a job at Disney, the company is so far ahead of the game because everybody knows what's going to be expected of you if you're going to work there.
I think those three keys are very powerful and very important. But you also brought up something now right at the end, which is key for us all. And that is this piece around people know before they enter, this is what Disney's going to expect. But I'm not Disney, or Charlie's not Disney, or company ABC is not Disney. And, a lot of this customer experience driven culture, I believe, is very much has to start in the hiring process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm now thinking about being XYZ company and going, okay, but how do we hire for that? I mean, we can ask the right questions and people will, I do this with the teams that I work with and they're like, well, we can ask them that. And I said, no, please don't just ask. If you say, what are they going to say? No.
Are you a team player?
No, I'm not.
Yes, I am.
I like to go back and smoke cigarettes and chew. Nobody says that.
Right.
So talk to us about that side of it, Dennis. Like, how do we get the leaders who are listening, watching to actually go, oh, all right, that's what I'm missing.
So a couple of things is first of all, if you think about, and every leader I ask can give me the answer to this. Name 3 people on your team that if you could clone those 3 people, your customer service would be off the charts. Name 3 people. And they'll instantly name 3 people. Okay, what is it about them? They'll instantly tell you exactly what it is about them. So now you've started to form a benchmark of what you're looking for, okay?
Right.
So now when you're interviewing somebody, you're not just listening for the responses. Am I seeing what I want to see on the job? Am I seeing the passion that comes to them as they're interacting with me, as they interact with the receptionist, as they interact with other interviewers, you know, because one of the key things I think at Disney is that all of the people doing the interviewing are all former frontline cast members. So they know what it takes to do the job. So, so are you seeing and hearing those things that just come naturally to that person? And then there's one other element, Dove, that we never think about, but I think is a critical factor. Keep in mind, and I would ask everybody watching to keep this in mind, training begins with the hiring process.
Definitely.
You want to model the values of the organization during the training process. So if you say one of your values is attention to detail, and your hiring process is disjointed and confusing, okay, you are modeling what the culture really is. You might have a cultural wish that attention to detail is important. So that's why when you go to interview for a job at Disney, you go to the casting center, because they want you to know you're being cast for a role. It's bigger than the tasks of the job. You're treated as a guest throughout the experience. The casting center is very carefully designed to kind of take you through the story of Disney. So you're being enculturated without even knowing it before you've even been hired for a role. So, you know, again, it's making sure that you're not just listening, but you're watching what you want, you know, for what you want to see, that you're modeling the values of the organization, and to recognize that if you're not hearing and seeing the things that you want to see on the job, don't think you're going to put people through a magical training program that's going to change them. Because I always tell people who are involved in interviewing, keep in mind, this is that person at their best.
Yes.
Okay? They're trying to get the job. It's not going to get better than this.
No, this is the
this
best.
Is it. Right. This is as good as it's going to get. So if you're not seeing what you want to see, if you're not hearing what you want to hear, if it's just not working out. Now, I recognize it is tough to run short-staffed. And we've all had to do it at some point.
Yep.
But I think most people watching would agree it's worse when you hire the wrong person, because everything gets harder. And we as leaders lose credibility you know, when we bring the wrong, because it poisons the well. And everybody knows it poisons the well. So, you know, if we're going to spend our time somewhere, getting the right person on board is a pretty good place to spend your time.
You know, we're talking about the leaders developing a customer service based culture. But we're in so many ways, Dennis, I think we're talking about culture, period. And in our work, one of the things we talk about is I'll go in a company and say, what's your culture? And they'll hand me some brochure and I'll go, that's
a wallet card.
That's your brochure. And they go, no, but that outlines our culture. No, it doesn't. And you go, what do you mean? I go, and you would say, that's your cultural wish. That's what you'd like it to be. But what is it? That's why I love the show Undercover Boss. What is it? Because when you go undercover, that's what it really is. Give me a couple of days inside of the company as the newbie, and I'll tell you what the culture is. You think the culture is arrive at 9 or arrive at 8:55 and start at 9, and everybody arrives at 9 and starts at 9:10? That's the real culture. As an example. But you said something here that I got to say that I'm a bit evangelical about, and that is that I believe in that you have got to understand, you've got to accept that your culture is, shorten the word, is a cult. And if you've not outlined that cult clearly, then you're not going to know who's the right people for it. Because if you go, I studied cult psychology.
Oh, did you really?
Oh, yeah. And I studied it and was involved in it and de-radicalizing people out of cults.
Wow.
And all that stuff. And it's fascinating to watch it in cultures. Because cults are brilliant at sorting out who should be in and who should be out. And it's got people go, oh, you know, those people are idiots because they're in a cult. No, they're not. You've got doctors and lawyers and scientists inside of a cult, you know, and yet the cult leaders banging their missus and their kids, and they're okay with it. It doesn't match their values. No, because they understand, like the people who are doing the hiring, let's use that term, for the cult, like they'd be brilliant inside of a corporation because they understand the values and they translate that so clearly, and they look for the markers of who should come in and who shouldn't.
Right.
And so one of the things that you're describing to me as I watch this in my mind, that person coming into the cast center, being walked through the history, being walked through all those experiences, you are actually testing them to watch reactions inside the cult.
Right.
Does this rub up against your own personal values in a way that doesn't meet you? And if it does, you will get in that room. By the time you sit down to be interviewed, you'll already be revealing, what the hell am I doing here?
Right. Or, and you may just say, this is not for me.
Not for me. Or you're like,
I'm out of here.
Exactly. Or you're like, oh my God, I'm home.
Yeah, right. And that's what they're looking for.
Exactly.
And so in this case, we're talking about a cult in the best sense of obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
And obviously people can opt out. But yeah, one of the pushbacks I often get from people is, especially when I talk about Disney training, is they say, well, that sounds like brainwashing.
It is.
And I always say, no, it's good business. It's good business.
It is. Psychological level.
Yeah.
Exactly what it is. And the answer to that is, if you don't want it, the only difference between a cult and a cult of culture is you get to opt out. Right. In a cult, there's all kinds of punishments. In a cult of a corporation, the punishment is you don't have the job.
You go. You either make the decision or the company makes the decision.
Right.
But the decision is made. And if you do it right,
so clear in Disney.
If you've done it right, that happens pretty quickly.
Exactly. That's my point.
Yeah, that happens pretty quickly. Too many organizations, I think, do the employee and the company a disservice by holding on to people who are not right fit for too long. Yeah, that's just the way John is, and well, if that's the way John is, they shouldn't be working here. It should be. And you look at the best companies, the ones that are always held up as the best of the best. There's a cult element to it. Disney, Apple, Chick-fil-A, Amazon, all of them.
These amazing cultures.
Yeah.
I can look at them from a cult psychology point and go, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And you can criticize that, you can judge it because of the word cult.
Yeah.
But look at the word culture.
That's the
it's
foundation.
Already embedded, right? And so it's learning becoming that cult and making sure that everybody understands this is what it is.
Yeah.
So when people years ago, I had a personal development company, a seminar company, and people would say, friends or sisters or siblings or brothers or family members would say to somebody, "I think you're in a cult."
Yeah.
And they come to me, these people, and they say, "What do you think I should say to that?" I say yes.
Yeah.
It disarms them. They go, "What do you mean?" And they say, "Yes, I'm in a cult." And they go, "See, I told you." No, you don't understand. It's a cult of one. It's my cult. I'm evoking who I am at my best level, and that may not fit with your cult anymore.
Right.
It's this cult of one, and that by that I get to choose. So I get to choose to attach me to the Disney culture or whatever it might be.
You made a really good point a few minutes ago where you said the ones who are right for the organization feel like they are home.
Exactly.
And that's a very powerful statement, because that's how I felt when I went to work for Disney. I really did feel like I was home. That these are my people. This is where I fit really well, and I think I'm going to excel here. Now, I didn't know that at the time. I was 19 years old. I was Captain Nemo at 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I didn't know how long I was going to be there, but it felt right, and I felt these are my people, and it turned out it was right.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
Now the book is Unleashing Excellence, the latest book. Outside of Disney, is there a company that we might recognize, and or is there a company we might not recognize who are really doing a great job of what you are talking about in that book?
Yeah. So I would take there's a bank. Well, aside from the usual suspects, okay?
Right.
Because we would say Nordstrom, Southwest Airlines, we're all going to name some of the same companies.
Yeah.
There's a bank out of Texas, based in Abilene, Texas, called First Financial Bank Shares. And it's a community bank. It's becoming more of a regional bank now. They're growing because they've been so successful. But this is a bank I started working with back in 2004, 2005, when they were much smaller. And from the CEO all the way through the organization, they bought into the concept that financial products are commodities. The only thing that is going to differentiate us from every bank that's on every corner in every town in Texas is the service that we provide, the experience that we provide. So they embraced exactly what we've been talking about, defining what they want the experience to be, building it into all of the aspects of the organization, hiring, training, reinforcement, eliminating barriers to excellence, all of the elements. And they put a team together to really focus on this. That team still meets once a month. And now it's evolved over time. The team members have evolved over time, but that team still meets once a month to discuss how are things going. Are we still living the values of the organization? And so what that said, and they're usually rated either number one, number two in terms of community banks in the country. They flip-flop between another bank. And what that says to me, the importance of consistency and the importance of dedication to it. I know you've worked with organizations and I've worked with an organization that they're looking for a smile pill.
Oh yeah.
That can you give our people a pill that will suddenly make them be customer friendly and customer centric and it doesn't work that way. It takes time.
Well, if you give them a couple of grand,
yeah,
it'll work for a couple of days.
For a couple of days. And that actually brings up a good point, because here's what happens is every initiative is exciting at the launch, right? Yeah. You get a team together, you put a rally together, you have a launch, the CEO gets up and does a thing, and it's just exciting. Then you reach a point a couple of months into it where it feels like it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've invested this time, we've invested this money, and it feels like it's not working. That's a natural part of the process. Yes. Because there's skepticism involved. People have lived through flavor of the month programs before, and they're to themselves, to their buddies, they're saying, just wait it out, it'll go away. And so what happens is organizations abandon it because it feels like it's not working. Then they start over again. And they keep starting over from the same place.
They're always looking for the magic bullet.
They're always looking for the magic bullet. Where if you've got to muscle your way through those times when you feel like you're spinning your wheels. And you feel like, if I have to talk about this one more time, I'm going to scream. You need to talk about it 100 more times. You've got to muscle your way through those times when it feels like it's not working, where people understand this is where we're going. And this is non-negotiable. This is where the organization is heading. So now after a time, and you want to start another initiative to build, you're building from here versus constantly starting over again. So, from a leadership perspective, just that commitment to muscle through the tough times is a critical success factor. It's not a magic bullet.
No. One of the things we speak about in all of our work is we say, like, I don't care about your values because they're just words.
Yeah.
What is non-negotiable?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the language we use. What is non-negotiable?
How non-negotiable are your non-negotiables?
And that's what I say. Is that non-negotiable? Yeah. So is that non-negotiable for you as the CEO? Well, no, right. For the employees. Well, then it's not non-negotiable.
Yeah. Right.
It's only non-negotiable if it's non-negotiable.
It's an awesome point.
It's called non-negotiable, not negotiable.
Right. That's
not hierarchy non-negotiable, but non-negotiable. And so that to me is so important, because that's a piece of integrity that so often falls through the cracks, because we've been talking about the front end, which is this, customer centric, but I love what you're talking about here, Dennis. That's so important. Is that customer centric? Yes, it applies to the front line, but it doesn't work unless at the back end, at the top of the pyramid, we're not living it.
Yeah. One of my favorite photos, I wish I had it handy here to show you, but it is actually my all-time favorite Disney photograph. It was taken in the late 1950s at Disneyland. And it's a photo that somebody captured of Walt Disney picking up trash off the ground at Disneyland. And I just love that because I like to imagine the new hire at Disneyland with his or her trainer. And the trainer says, it's important to pick up trash off the ground. And they turn around and there's Walt Disney picking up trash off the ground and putting it into the trash can. I mean, training does not get any better than that.
But we're back to cult again because, again, whatever one talks about with Disney, the bottom line is he drank his own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we use that language too when we talk about cultures. But that's what it comes from. It comes from cult language.
Yes, it does. Yes,
Disney drank his own Kool-Aid. He walked around and he picked up trash. He didn't tell you pick up trash. I'm going to throw trash because I'm the boss. No. He drank his own Kool-Aid. And that is what I'm saying about if we're going to have a customer service base, we have to be willing to do that. But the piece I want to come to before we finish is, because it's important, is how does that, what do you see as the potential challenges and how do we overcome the challenges in an increasingly remote world, in an increasingly, not eyeball to eyeball, face to face, skin to skin?
Well, the first thing I would say is that good leadership and good service skills, the principles are principles, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of how we're interacting with customers, how we're interacting with employees. Solid principles, they work no matter what. The other thing that I would say is that in today's environment, just because of the remote factor, is we need as leaders to up our game in terms of communication, in terms of involving our people, in terms of, hey, what are you hearing from our customers that is terrible about what we're doing right now? What can we do about it? Let's just pick one thing that we can do something about. So it's taking those same principles, but we've got to up our game just in terms of the amount of time we dedicate to it. So let's look at what you and I are doing right now. You and I both spend a lot of time in front of live audiences, right? We both speak with live audiences. Now, I would say that while I miss live audiences, I really do miss that time in front of live audiences. I think this is very effective.
Absolutely.
I think that the passion has got to come through, the stories have got to come through, the principles have got to be crystal clear. So any organization can have this kind of communication with their people. It's just a different way of doing it than we're used to. But hopefully people are seeing our passion. They're hearing we're pretty clear on what the experience is supposed to be. We're hopefully making it engaging. I hope. Fingers crossed. But so it's not rocket science. It's taking those core principles that most of us, we know what they are, right? In our hearts, we know what they are, and just adapting them to this medium. But I know, from our discussion, I'm enjoying this thoroughly. I'm enjoying hearing what you're sharing. I'm thinking about some of the things that you've shared that I think, that's a really good point. That's what we want our people to be doing too. It's just a different medium now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we've got to, I did a video series around certainty and uncertainty. And, I recently released an audio on my Curiosity Bites, my other podcast. And it was a snackette, we call them, which is between 4 and 8 minutes. And in there, I talked about the paradox of certainty and uncertainty and how we want certainty because we can rely on it and control it. And we want uncertainty because it makes lives interesting. Right. But at the same time, we also have to understand that if we cling to certainty, nothing evolves and changes. And so people want to say, well, we'll use this in replacement of that. No, don't use anything in replacement of anything else. Find something better. In the current circumstances, this is not to do this until we get back to normal. Normal's done. Forget it.
Yeah.
Normal's done. Forget it. Pretend you're never going to be able to have an in-person meeting ever again in your life.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's not an option, what is the new option? Rather than what can we do to bridge it? No, forget bridging it. We're burning the ships, dude. Let's burn the ships and say, now what? Okay. Well, now we're going to create something brand new. And I think that is something we're being offered at the level of customer experience like never before.
And that's why I think involving our people is so important.
I do too.
Because they are dealing with panicked customers in some cases, right? Certainly very confused customers. And so if we ignore that, what happens is our people put an emotional barrier between themselves and the customer. Now, it's one thing when that happens face to face, because you can get over that. You've already got a barrier between yourself and the customer in this virtual environment. Now you layer another barrier of an uncaring feeling. You've multiplied it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why, getting our people involved to remove as many of those barriers as possible, to provide them the resources they need to be successful. Recognizing you're not going to solve every issue, but when your people understand that you're doing what you can to set them up for success, by and large, they're willing to overlook some of the flaws in the system.
Yeah, I agree. Dennis, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I really thank you.
I have too.
Before we go, there's a couple of things I want to ask. One is I'm going to ask you to share where people can get in touch with you, find out more about your resources, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, I always like to ask my guests at the end of the show to share with us something that we can do to really embody what it is that you've been sharing.
Yeah.
Preferably in the next very short period of time.
Yeah.
Certainly 24 to 48 hours. What would you recommend that we do?
I would say that anybody listening right now, and I talked about this earlier, is sit down either by yourself, it depends on the organization, but sit down by yourself or with a team, virtually or in person, whatever works, and identify those three things that you would want your customers to say to somebody about their experience. And then begin the dialogue of, so what has to happen in order for them to say those three things about us? That really gets things underway. That opens up so much dialogue and so much possibility, that those two simple questions really get things going and get people, and that gets people energized too. So that would be my main suggestion that hopefully kind of encapsulates everything that I've talked about today.
So the three things I would want my customer to say about their experience of working with or being with us,
being a customer of yours,
being a customer of ours, okay, and then asking how do we make that happen? What has to happen
in order for them to say those three things? If you said you want your customers to feel welcome, okay, well then what makes people feel welcome? It's not rocket science. It depends on the organization, but if it's a physical interaction, well, the smile, the greeting, the using the customer's name, the fond farewell. I mean, it all kind of just falls into place when you start defining what you want your customers to say.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things that we often make way more complicated.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And it's interesting because that word keeps coming back to me, which is humanity. I mean, I think at a level of customer experience, I would say humanity. If I had to use one word, it's humanity.
I would agree.
Treat these people with a level of humanity that shows them exactly what Bruce taught you: dignity, respect, honor, even when they don't treat you that way. That's the trick.
Yeah.
That's the real trick, because I'm sure there are people who go to Disneyland.
No.
It's never happened now because they're all tested before they come in. Who are douchebags as customers.
I can't tell you how many times I was held personally accountable for the rain.
Really?
Just, but that's where the empathy comes in. These people spent all this money. They traveled all the way to Orlando. First day at Disney World and it's pouring down rain. Okay, if you look at it the way, I can understand that frustration, and I'm the one that's handiest for them to take it out on. And that's where being a professional comes into play. Part of the job. Part of the job is to manage those types of situations.
But that for me right there, that's the period, is that customer experience means that you will deal with that person with that dignity, with that empathy, understanding that human beings are emotional beings. Yeah. We are going to have an emotional response to something, and that might not always smell so nice if you're on the receiving end of it. But if you can respond to it with dignity and humanity, what a difference that is.
If somebody can ever find me a job where you don't have to deal with frustrated customers, let me know what that is, because that's just part of having a job. It's that happens.
It is. Absolutely, it is. So Dennis, again, this has been a great combo. Please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and all of your wonderful resources.
As a hub, we use our website as the main hub for everything. So it's pretty simple. It's Snow Associates, all one word, snowassociates.com. That's where information about my live programs, my virtual programs, my books, and so forth, all of that is there. My blog, my videos, pictures of my grandkids, whatever people want.
You have
I've got 2 grandkids.
You don't have great-great-grandchildren? I mean,
no. I remember, I did not work for Walt.
Couldn't resist.
But I do have 2 grandkids, and they are the light of my life.
I understand. I have 4, and the 5th one on the way.
Is that right? Congratulations. Yeah, your life changed. Kids are great. Grandchildren it's heaven on earth.
Yeah, grandkids are much better, because when they get on your nerves, you can give them back.
That's right. Well, I always say the difference between kids and grandkids, when you take your kids out for a nice dinner and they're acting up, be quiet. You're bothering everybody. With your grandchild, I don't care. Look how cute she is, everybody.
You're actually winding them up.
Yeah. Look how cute.
That's exactly what. Like you're a bad example. I know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Here they are.
Exactly. Now I've wound them up. You can put them to bed.
That's right.
So they can go to snowassociates.com.
Correct.
And they can find you online.
Books available on Amazon, of course. The answer to anything nowadays of where can I buy the book? Amazon, anything, where you buy anything. Amazon. I have 2 books, Lessons from the Mouse, which is pretty self-explanatory, and the one you mentioned earlier, Unleashing Excellence.
Well, Dennis Snow, it has been a pleasure and honor, sir. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. And this is a very valuable show for everyone in a leadership position. Whether you think you are a front-facing company or not, you are, because you always have customers, and there's a heck of a lot to learn from Dennis Snow. So I want to thank Dennis Snow. I want to thank you for tuning in, dear listener. And remember, you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode that you've been listening to, or any past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. So to find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com, because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how your culture can serve at a higher possible level, and about the 3 things that you would want your customers to experience. What is it, the 3 things that you would want them to say about you and about your company? I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.